100 days, 505 confirmed kills, one man. He wasn't a professional soldier, he wasn't a trained sniper, he was a farmer, 5 foot 3 inches tall, 33 years old, used a standard-issue rifle with no modifications, no scope, no special equipment. Against him, 1 million Soviet soldiers, thousands of tanks, unlimited artillery, and the full industrial might of the Soviet Union. The odds were so absurd that the world expected Finland to collapse within weeks. Instead, this farmer used a trick so simple that military commanders initially laughed at him. They stopped laughing when their soldiers started dying. 5 per day. Every single day. For over 3 months. The Soviets created special units just to hunt him. They failed. They used artillery barrages to destroy entire forests where he operated. He survived. They offered massive rewards for his capture or death. Nobody collected. His trick wasn't advanced technology. It wasn't superior training. It was understanding one simple truth that professional soldiers had forgotten. In winter warfare, being invisible matters more than seeing far. And what he did to stay invisible was so counterintuitive that it rewrote military doctrine worldwide. November 30th, 1939. The Soviet Union launched a full-scale invasion of Finland with a force so overwhelming that victory seemed inevitable. The numbers were staggering. Finland had a population of 3.7 million. The Soviet Union had 170 million. The military disparity was even worse. Finland could field roughly 300,000 troops. The Soviets attacked with over 1 million soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. The world expected Finland to surrender within weeks. The Soviets expected to be eating Christmas dinner in Helsinki. What nobody expected was that a collection of Finnish farmers, factory workers, and shopkeepers would fight the Red Army to a standstill using tactics so unconventional that they seemed insane. Simo Häyhä was one of those farmers. Born in 1905 in Rautjärvi, a rural area near the Soviet border, he'd spent his entire life in the forests. He hunted for food, he worked his small farm, he served his mandatory year in the Finnish military and went home without distinguishing himself in any way. When the war started, he was 33 years old, barely over 5 feet tall, and probably the least intimidating soldier in the Finnish army. He reported to his unit with the same rifle he used for hunting, a standard Mosin Nagant M28-30. No scope, no modifications, just iron sights and decades of experience shooting in Finnish winter conditions. The Finnish military issued scoped rifles to snipers. That was standard doctrine worldwide. Magnification allowed snipers to see targets at longer ranges, identify threats more clearly, and make precision shots that iron sights couldn't match. Every military in the world trained snipers to use scopes. Häyhä took one look at the scoped rifles and refused them. He insisted on keeping his iron-sighted Mosin Nagant. His commanders thought he was either stupid or stubbornly attached to his personal weapon. Some suspected he simply didn't know how to use a scope properly. They were all wrong. Häyhä understood something that professional soldiers had forgotten. In Finnish winter conditions, a telescopic scope has 3 fatal vulnerabilities. First, scope glint. Even the smallest amount of light reflecting off glass lenses creates a bright flash visible for hundreds of meters. In winter, with sun reflecting off snow, that glint is like a beacon advertising the sniper's exact position. Second, breath fog. When you put your face close to a scope in freezing temperatures, your breath creates condensation that fogs the lenses. Soviet snipers were constantly wiping their scopes, creating movement that gave away their positions. Third, height. To use a scope, you have to raise your head higher to get proper eye relief. That extra few inches of elevation creates a silhouette against the snow. Each of these vulnerabilities was a death sentence. Soviet snipers with their advanced scopes were dying within hours of deployment. Häyhä eliminated all 3 vulnerabilities by using iron sights. No glass to create glint, no scope to fog up, no extra height required. He could shoot from positions so low to the ground that he was essentially invisible. But removing the scope created a new challenge. How do you make precision shots at range without magnification? Häyhä had spent decades hunting in these forests. He knew the distances instinctively. More importantly, he understood that in winter warfare, long-range shooting was less effective than close-range certainty. Soviet doctrine emphasized long-range engagement. Häyhä let enemies get close, sometimes within 100 meters before firing. At that range, iron sights were perfectly adequate and his position remained undetectable. The real genius was in the details. Häyhä developed techniques that sound trivial until you understand their purpose. He kept snow in his mouth while shooting. Why? Because in -40-degree temperatures, every breath creates a visible cloud of condensation. That cloud pinpoints your exact location. Snow in his mouth cooled his breath enough to eliminate the telltale fog. He compacted the snow directly in front of his shooting position. Why? Because when a rifle fires, the muzzle blast disturbs loose snow, creating a visible puff that marks the shooter's location. Compacted snow eliminated this giveaway. He only shot from depressions or behind natural barriers, never from elevated positions. Why? Because silhouettes against snow are visible for kilometers. Shooting from ground level eliminated his profile entirely. The Soviet Army's initial response to Finnish snipers was predictable. Deploy counter-snipers with better equipment. The Red Army had excellent marksmen with scoped rifles and formal training. They set up in what they thought were ideal positions, elevated spots with good fields of view. Häyhä killed them first. The Soviets couldn't understand how. Their snipers had superior equipment, formal training, and numerical advantage. Yet they kept dying to an enemy they never saw. Finnish snow camouflage was perfect. White suits over white snow created total invisibility. But the Soviets had white camouflage too. The difference was position selection and movement discipline. Soviet snipers set up where doctrine said they should, high ground with long sight lines. Häyhä set up where the terrain dictated, depressions, behind snowbanks, in positions so low that even his muzzle flash was partially concealed. Then came the movement. Häyhä never fired more than a handful of shots from the same position. After 3 or 4 kills, he would relocate, sometimes hundreds of meters, sometimes just a few meters to a different angle. The Soviets would finally identify his approximate position, call in artillery and saturate the area with shells. They'd find his abandoned firing position, perfectly preserved in the snow, showing where he'd been. But Häyhä was already somewhere else, watching the artillery strike through iron sights, waiting for the smoke to clear so he could resume hunting. The psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. Soviet troops began showing symptoms of what military psychologists now call sniper paralysis. Soldiers refused to move. They wouldn't leave trenches. They wouldn't advance even when ordered. Officers had to threaten soldiers at gunpoint to get them to move forward, because nobody knew where the Finnish snipers were. Every snowdrift could hide a shooter. Every tree line could be a kill zone. The invisible threat was more paralyzing than visible enemy formations. Häyhä personally accounted for over 500 confirmed kills, but his psychological impact affected tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers who simply stopped functioning as effective combat troops. Soviet commanders recognized they were facing something unprecedented. They created specialized anti-sniper units with the sole mission of hunting Finnish marksmen. These units had the best equipment, the most experienced shooters, and unlimited resources. They studied Finnish tactics. They analyzed kill patterns. They tried to predict where snipers would be. None of it worked against Häyhä because he wasn't following any doctrine. He was hunting. That's a critical distinction. Military snipers are trained to follow tactical patterns. Häyhä followed prey behavior. Military doctrine says engage targets at maximum effective range. Hunters wait for targets to enter kill zones. Military doctrine says establish a hide and control an area. Hunters move constantly to stay ahead of prey awareness. The Soviets were fighting a military sniper. Häyhä was hunting them. The legend of Belaya Smrt, the White Death, spread through Soviet ranks faster than official communications. Soldiers who survived encounters described an invisible enemy who killed without warning. No muzzle flash, no sound of the shot reaching them before the bullet. Just sudden death. The Soviets tried everything. They put bounties on Finnish snipers, with special rewards for the White Death specifically. Nobody collected because nobody who got close to Häyhä lived to report it. They used artillery to destroy entire forests where Häyhä was operating. He'd already relocated before the shells landed, using the bombardment as cover to move to new positions. They attempted coordinated sweeps with infantry and dogs. Häyhä evaded them through intimate knowledge of terrain the Soviets barely understood. He knew every depression, every frozen stream bed, every stand of trees that provided concealment. The Soviets were operating in unfamiliar territory. Häyhä was hunting in his backyard. The kill count climbed, 100, 200, 300. Each confirmed kill had to be verified by a Finnish officer. In modern terms, Häyhä would be accused of stat padding, but Finnish doctrine required confirmation because they knew the psychological value of accurate numbers. When Soviet intelligence reported that a single Finnish sniper had over 300 confirmed kills, Soviet commanders initially dismissed it as propaganda. Then they started receiving casualty reports. The numbers matched. One man was killing Soviet soldiers at a rate that exceeded entire Finnish units. The pattern was relentless. Häyhä would position himself before dawn. Freezing temperatures required him to remain absolutely still for hours. Movement created frost patterns on fabric that were visible at distance. So he stayed motionless, sometimes for 12 hours at a stretch, waiting for Soviet patrols or advancing units. When targets entered his kill zone, he'd fire. 3 shots, maybe 4, precise, methodical. Then he'd relocate. The discipline was extraordinary. There are documented cases of Häyhä having clear shots at Soviet officers, but holding fire because taking the shot would compromise his position or break his 3-shot rule. Lesser snipers would have taken the high-value target. Häyhä waited for conditions that favored survival over opportunity. This was hunters' patience weaponized. A deer hunter can wait all day for the right shot because the deer doesn't shoot back. Military snipers are trained for faster engagement because targets are dangerous. Häyhä combined both. The patience of a hunter with the lethality of a trained marksman. The combination was unstoppable. By late February 1940, Häyhä's confirmed kill count exceeded 500 in approximately 98 days of active combat. That's an average of over 5 kills per day, every single day, for more than 3 months. No sniper in history has matched this record. Not in World War II, not in Vietnam, not in modern conflicts with advanced technology and superior training. A Finnish farmer with iron sights and winter camouflage killed more enemy soldiers in 3 months than most snipers kill in entire careers. March 6, 1940. Häyhä was in position near Kola, continuing operations as Soviet forces made desperate final pushes before the war's end. Soviet counter-sniper teams had identified his general area. They couldn't locate him precisely, but they saturated the zone with fire. An explosive round, reports vary whether it was a direct shot or shrapnel, hit Häyhä in the face. The damage was catastrophic. The left side of his jaw was destroyed, teeth shattered, cheekbone fractured. By any reasonable assessment, the wound was fatal. Finnish soldiers found him days later, still alive, unconscious, but breathing. How he survived the initial wound in -40-degree temperatures is still unclear. He was evacuated to a field hospital where doctors performed emergency surgery with limited supplies and no expectation of survival. Häyhä remained in a coma for days. When he woke up on March 13, 1940, the war was over. The Winter War ended with a negotiated peace that ceded some Finnish territory but preserved Finnish independence. Häyhä had spent the entire war fighting. 505 confirmed kills. Some estimates put the actual number much higher when including unconfirmed kills and deaths from his submachine gun engagements, potentially over 800 enemy casualties directly attributable to one man. The facial wound left permanent disfigurement. Half his face was reconstructed through multiple surgeries. He would never look the same. But he lived, and his legend was just beginning to influence military doctrine worldwide. The impact on World War II sniper training was immediate and profound. When the war expanded globally, military planners studied the Winter War extensively. The Finnish success against overwhelming Soviet numbers became a case study in asymmetric warfare, and Häyhä's techniques became required learning. British sniper schools began teaching iron sight shooting alongside scoped techniques. American Marine Corps sniper training incorporated lessons from Häyhä's tactics, low shooting positions, minimal shots per location, understanding how environmental conditions affect visibility. The Germans, who'd been developing their own sniper doctrine, added Finnish techniques to their training programs. Even the Soviets, despite losing over 20,000 soldiers to Finnish snipers during the Winter War, adapted their training to counter Häyhä-style tactics. The specific technical innovations that resulted from studying Häyhä's methods include anti-reflective scope coatings, designed to reduce the glint that had killed so many Soviet snipers, low-profile scope mounts that allowed shooters to get closer to the ground, development of ghillie suits specifically designed for winter environments, training programs emphasizing position selection over raw marksmanship, recognizing that being unseen was more valuable than being able to shoot accurately at extreme range. Modern military doctrine on scout snipers, emphasizing mobility and intelligence gathering over static position holding, traces directly back to Häyhä's methods. The technology lessons were equally important. Throughout World War II and into the Cold War, there was constant debate about whether snipers needed scopes. Häyhä proved definitively that in certain conditions, scopes were liabilities rather than assets. This led to development of backup iron sights on scoped rifles, recognition that environmental conditions should dictate equipment rather than doctrine, and eventually to development of sealed scopes with nitrogen purging to prevent fogging. None of these innovations would have occurred without Häyhä demonstrating that traditional scoped sniper doctrine could be completely wrong in winter conditions. Soviet military analysts after the war were brutally honest in their assessments. They'd sent technologically superior forces with better equipment against Finnish troops using basic rifles, and the Finns had achieved casualty ratios that seemed impossible. One Soviet after-action report specifically mentioned Häyhä's iron sight technique as something that had rendered our counter-sniper efforts ineffective. That's extraordinary. A military superpower admitting that a farmer's hunting techniques defeated their professional military capabilities. The lesson was clear. Technology doesn't overcome fundamental tactical wisdom. Environment matters more than equipment. Adaptation beats doctrine. Häyhä lived until 2002. He was 96 years old when he died. He spent the post-war decades as a farmer and hunter, the same quiet life he'd lived before the war. He rarely spoke about his wartime service. When asked about his incredible success as a sniper, his response was characteristically Finnish in its understatement. Practice. That's it. Practice. Not natural talent, not superior equipment, not special training, just practice. Decades of hunting in Finnish forests, learning the environment, understanding how light works on snow, how sound travels in frozen air, how to remain motionless in temperatures that kill unprepared people within hours. All of that was practice. When war came, he applied those skills against human targets instead of deer and elk. The skills transferred perfectly. The result was 505 confirmed deaths in 100 days. When reporters pushed for more details about how he felt about killing so many people, Häyhä's response was even more succinct. I did what had to be done. No boasting, no trauma, no guilt. Just recognition that war required certain actions, and he executed those actions more effectively than anyone else. That matter-of-fact approach to extreme violence is distinctly Finnish. Emotional displays are considered weakness. Competence speaks for itself. Häyhä was competent. The broader lesson from Häyhä's story transcends military tactics. It's about the power of simplicity applied perfectly. The Soviets had better equipment, more training, vastly superior numbers. They should have won every engagement decisively. Instead, they lost catastrophically to an enemy who understood that simple solutions matched to environmental conditions beat complex solutions that ignore context. Häyhä's iron sight technique was simpler than scoped shooting. His camouflage was basic white fabric. His tactics were hunting techniques developed over centuries. None of it was innovative in the sense of being new. It was all old knowledge applied correctly. That's the real lesson. Innovation isn't always about new technology or revolutionary ideas. Sometimes it's recognizing that old, simple methods work better than modern, complex alternatives when environmental conditions favor simplicity. The Soviets were fighting with 20th-century military technology and doctrine. Häyhä was fighting with Stone Age hunting techniques refined through generations. Stone Age won because Stone Age was adapted to the environment. 505 Soviet soldiers learned that the hard way. They died to a man who was shorter than most of them, older than most of them, armed with a weapon inferior to theirs, supported by an army that was outnumbered 10-1. None of that mattered because Häyhä understood the winter forest better than they understood their equipment. The final statistics are worth examining in detail. 505 confirmed kills in approximately 98 days of combat. That's 5.15 kills per day, every day, for over 3 months. At the ranges, Häyhä typically engaged between 50 and 150 meters. His success rate was estimated at over 90%. Most snipers consider 70% success rate excellent. 90% is unprecedented. 0 confirmed cases of Häyhä being successfully targeted by counter-sniper fire before his wounding. Soviet counter-sniper teams had a life expectancy measured in hours once they entered areas where Häyhä operated. Some estimates suggest he personally killed over 30 Soviet snipers who were specifically hunting him. The psychological effect extended beyond quantifiable metrics. Soviet units operating in Häyhä's sector showed dramatically reduced combat effectiveness. Advances that should have taken days took weeks because soldiers moved cautiously, refused to expose themselves, and generally behaved as though every moment could be their last. Which was accurate. The mere possibility of Häyhä being in the area was enough to paralyze Soviet operations. That's psychological warfare at its most effective. One man creating enough fear to affect thousands of enemy soldiers' behavior. Modern military analysts studying Häyhä's techniques recognize several principles that remain relevant today. First, environmental mastery beats technological superiority. Häyhä knew his operating environment better than enemies knew their equipment. Second, simplicity reduces failure points. Complex systems fail in complex ways. Simple systems are robust. Häyhä's iron sight rifle had fewer things that could go wrong. Third, invisibility is a weapon. Creating uncertainty in enemy minds is as valuable as killing enemy soldiers. Fourth, discipline beats aggression. Häyhä's 3-shot rule kept him alive. Fifth, understanding prey behavior is fundamental to hunting humans. Soviet soldiers followed predictable patterns. Häyhä exploited those patterns mercilessly. These aren't lessons from military academies. These are insights from hunting experience applied to warfare. The fact that they proved more effective than formal military training is both remarkable and instructive. It suggests that military doctrine can become disconnected from practical reality, and that real-world experience in harsh environments creates competencies that classroom training cannot replicate. Häyhä was the ultimate proof of concept. The weapons technology evolution that followed the Winter War shows Häyhä's influence clearly. Pre-war sniper rifles emphasized magnification and range. Post-war sniper rifles emphasized versatility and adaptability. The ability to switch between scoped and iron sights became standard. Recognition that different environmental conditions required different approaches influenced rifle design for decades. Modern sniper rifles still incorporate backup iron sights specifically because of lessons learned from Häyhä's success. The development of practical ghillie suits for winter environments, complete with white camouflage and reduced thermal signature, traces directly to Finnish winter war tactics. The concept of scout snipers, mobile, lightly equipped marksmen who prioritize position selection and intelligence gathering over long-range shooting, is fundamentally Häyhä's approach institutionalized into modern military structure. Even today, Special Operations Forces train extensively in cold weather operations using techniques that Häyhä pioneered. The United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper School teaches position selection methodology almost identical to Häyhä's approach: low ground, natural concealment, minimal exposure, limited shots per position. The terminology and doctrine might be modern, but the tactics are essentially unchanged from what a Finnish farmer figured out in 1939. The story of Simo Häyhä is often told as a military legend. One man against an army, the underdog who couldn't be beaten. That framing misses the deeper significance. Häyhä wasn't superhuman. He wasn't lucky. He was simply extraordinarily well suited to his specific circumstances. Finnish winter conditions, Soviet tactical doctrine, the terrain he knew intimately. When all those factors aligned, his lifetime of practical experience became the most lethal skill set on the battlefield. Change any variable and the outcome might have been different. Put Häyhä in a different environment, desert, jungle, urban terrain, and he'd have been just another soldier. Put him in a different era with different enemy tactics, and his approach might have failed. But in that specific time, that specific place, against that specific enemy, Häyhä was perfect. That's the real lesson. Effectiveness is context-dependent. There's no universal solution to military problems. There's only solutions that work in specific circumstances against specific threats. Häyhä's genius was recognizing what worked in his circumstances and executing it flawlessly. 505 times. The Soviets eventually learned to counter Finnish sniper tactics. They adapted their doctrine, changed their approaches, and reduced their casualties. But by then, the damage was done. The Winter War had cost the Soviets catastrophic losses and achieved nothing of strategic value. Finland remained independent, and one farmer with a rifle had become the deadliest sniper in military history. When Häyhä died in 2002, military delegations from multiple countries attended his funeral. Representatives from nations that had studied his tactics for decades came to pay respects to a man who'd changed how modern militaries approach sniper warfare. The Finnish government honored him. His rifle is preserved in a museum. His techniques are still taught. His record still stands unbroken. 62 years after his last combat action, 80-year-old Häyhä was asked one final time how he'd achieved such success. His answer, given in an interview shortly before his death, was unchanged. "I did what had to be done. No elaboration, no self-promotion. Just simple acknowledgement that circumstances required certain actions, and he executed those actions as well as anyone could. That humility, combined with the most lethal combat record in sniper history, defines Häyhä's legacy. He proved that wars aren't won by the side with the best technology or the most soldiers. They're won by the side that best adapts to conditions and executes fundamentals flawlessly. Sometimes that means a farmer with iron sights beats professional soldiers with advanced equipment. Sometimes simple beats complex. Sometimes 505 deaths come from one man who understood snow, cold, patience, and prey behavior better than anyone else alive. That's not legend, that's mathematics. 505 divided by 98 days equals over 5 kills daily for 3 straight months. The numbers don't lie. And the numbers say that Simo Häyhä was the most effective sniper in military history. Not because of technology, not because of training, because he understood one simple truth. In winter warfare, invisible beats everything. And he made himself invisible.